Carla Walker was 17, a senior at Western Hills High School, cheerleader, honor roll student described by classmates as the kind of girl everyone assumed would leave Fort Worth and do something remarkable. On the night of February 15, 1974, she and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, went to a Valentine's dance, then stopped afterward at Lucky Lane's bowling alley on the west side of the city. It was a normal Friday night. Nothing about it suggested danger. Here's the first open question this case leaves you with. What happened in that parking lot happened so fast that Rodney, a young man standing right next to her, couldn't stop it. And for decades, no one could tell you who did it. If this case is gripping you already, save this video. You're going to want to come back to this one because the timeline only gets tighter from here. Rodney and Carla walked out to his car around 12:30 in the morning. A man was waiting. He forced his way toward them, struck Rodney hard enough to leave him unconscious on the pavement, and when Rodney came to, Carla was gone. No struggle sounds anyone could pinpoint. No witnesses who saw a face, just an empty parking lot and a missing girl. 3 days later, on February 18th, a driver spotted her body in a culvert near Lake Benbrook, southwest of the city. Investigators determined she had been abducted, assaulted, and strangled. Fort Worth police opened a massive investigation, but here's what nobody tells you about cold cases from this era. 1974 had no DNA testing, no digital records, no national databases. Detectives had physical evidence but no way to read it. They interviewed hundreds of people. They chased leads for years. And one by one, every lead went cold. We're going to get to the piece of evidence that finally broke this case in a moment. And that's where it gets genuinely counterintuitive, because the answer wasn't found by chasing a new lead. It was found by going backward into other people's family trees, people who had never heard of Carla Walker. For over 4 decades, this stayed exactly like that. An open file, a preserved evidence kit, and a killer who kept living his life. Fast forward to 2019. Fort Worth police, like dozens of departments across the country, began re-examining their oldest unsolved cases through a new lens: forensic genetic genealogy. This is the same method that had just identified the Golden State Killer a year earlier, and it works by taking crime scene DNA, uploading the genetic profile to public genealogy databases, and building out family trees from distant relatives who share small segments of DNA with the suspect. Detectives partnered with Othram, a DNA sequencing lab based in the Woodlands, Texas, along with genetic genealogists who specialize in exactly this kind of decades-old case. The DNA collected from the scene in 1974 had been preserved well enough to extract a usable profile. From there, genealogists began mapping distant cousins, then narrowing branch by branch, a process that can take weeks of painstaking, unglamorous work, cross-referencing marriage records, birth certificates, and obituaries. Here's the pattern nobody sees coming. The family tree didn't lead investigators to a stranger. It led them to a name that had been sitting quietly in Fort Worth the entire time, a man named Glenn Samuel McCurley, Jr., who in 1974 had lived just a few blocks from where Carla disappeared. To confirm the match, investigators didn't need a warrant for a blood draw. They obtained a discarded item containing his DNA through routine surveillance, a legally established method used in dozens of genetic genealogy cases, and compared it directly to the decades-old crime scene sample. It matched. In September 2020, 46 years after Carla Walker vanished from that parking lot, Glenn Samuel McCurley, Jr., was arrested and charged with her murder. This is the part of the case that unsettles investigators the most, not the forensics, but the proximity. McCurley wasn't a drifter who vanished after the crime. He didn't flee the state. He stayed in Fort Worth. He worked. He lived an unremarkable, visible life for nearly 5 decades while the case that could have ended it sat unsolved a few miles away. Criminal psychologists who study long-dormant cold cases point to a specific and disturbing pattern here. Proximity offenders often rely on exactly this, the assumption that a killer either flees or gets caught quickly. When neither happens, investigators statistically deprioritize local, ordinary-looking suspects in favor of more explainable theories. A stranger passing through, an unknown drifter, someone with a record. McCurley had none of that. He blended in precisely because he wasn't looking for attention, and the system at the time had no tool that could see past that. After his arrest, McCurley ultimately pleaded guilty. In 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison. Prosecutors and investigators were direct about what closed this case. Not a confession, not a witness who finally came forward, but a laboratory process that didn't exist for 45 of the 46 years this case was open. And that's the detail that should stay with you. For genetic genealogy to work, the DNA has to survive. Evidence rooms across the country are full of preserved samples from cases just like this one, cases where the only thing standing between an open file and an arrest is time, funding, and someone deciding to look again. CTA 1213 Min. Cases like this one are being reopened right now, all across the country because of this exact method, and we cover them here every single day. If you want to understand how modern forensics is finally closing cases that sat cold for generations, subscribe and hit the bell icon. New case every day so you never miss the next one. Outro 1315 Min. Drop in the comments. If you found out someone you knew for decades had a secret like this hiding underneath their entire life, do you think you'd have ever seen it? What happened to Carla Walker in 1974 can't be undone. But her case became something bigger than one investigation. It became proof that unsolved doesn't have to mean forever. Somewhere in an evidence room right now, there's a sample like hers waiting on the same breakthrough. That's not speculation. It's already happened dozens of times since, and it will keep happening. But that's only half the story of what genetic genealogy has uncovered in Texas alone. If this one hit for you, the video I made on how this same method identified the Golden State Killer will make even more sense now, because that's the case that made all of this possible in the first place. In 1974, 17-year-old Carla Walker was abducted from a Fort Worth, Texas bowling alley parking lot in under 3 minutes. Her killer wasn't caught that year, that decade, or the next. For 46 years, the case sat cold, until forensic genetic genealogy, the same method that identified the Golden State Killer, quietly rebuilt a family tree from decades-old crime scene DNA and led investigators to a man who had been living blocks away the entire time. This is the true story of how modern DNA science finally closed one of Texas's longest-running cold cases. 0000, the question nobody could answer. 00, 45, who was Carla Walker. 02, 10, the night she disappeared. 04, 30 decades of dead ends. 06, 15, genetic genealogy enters the case. 08, 40, the family tree that named a killer. 10, 00, the psychology of hiding in plain sight. 12, 00, the sentence. 13, 00, what this case proves about unsolved. If you're new here, we cover a real documented cold case every single day. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss one.